divided at first into images that seemed to be mostly just about material culture. But before I start that, I want to touch on another inspiration. And by the way, there's another wonderful guest who's here, and they just gave me a lovely book by the name of Bruce Graff, and he's a master teacher, retired, he tells me, art teacher from Camden, and he and I were colleagues at the New Jersey Council for the Humanities. And this particular passage comes from one of our other colleagues who served, and this was another way in which this interdisciplinarity, I believe, that is really central to Stockton, is something that ultimately led me to be so involved in humanities. Normally a place that wouldn't, be having artists, but yet they had two of us. So they are pretty smart people. Jackson Lears teaches at Rutgers and has written a number of times on the history of America in various ways, and he's the editor of the Raritan Review, where he was. The element of, and he writes in his book, Something for Nothing, Luck in America, the History of Luck in America, the element of mystery, of irrational faith, had to survive for the ritual fetish to sustain any spiritual significance. As an early anthropologist of African American folk belief observed, the believer in fetishes is not foolish enough to worship blindly sticks and stones. It is a spirit dwelling within those objects which receives his reverence. Among the Luba of West Central Africa, for example, a blind man's stick can serve as both an activating agent of visionary powers and a conceptually meaningful object that concentrates knowledge, perception, imagery, and experience into one metaphorical location. So that these things that are part of the archive, whether they are documents or objects, and I know I've seen a couple of my history friends out there, like Paul, hi Paul, I think I see you already. That this is well known to them, and this is also something really central to what we've been concerned with in the arts. There we go. From Vicky's collection, and Vicky didn't mention this much, but she has also helped me by providing me access to items in her collection that are now actually not in her possession, but have gone to the National African American Museum on the Mall in Washington, and so it was a great help for me to have access before they went someplace where it would be harder to do. This body of work represents my exploration of various places, and you'll see, for those of you who can't see the caption so far away, the locations include and they're mostly public collections, and actually primarily the two private collections that I've worked from, both of those people are here today, both Vicky and Paul Shaw, so I'm really deeply grateful to them. The public collections have included University of Rochester, the Harriet Tubman House in Auburn, New York, Cornell University, the Nebraska State Historical Society, the Iowa State Historical Society, Rutgers University, among a range of other institutions. And so these, as I said, these are new ways for me to think of this. And one of the things that emerged as I photographed, and in particular, my interest in documents. I'm interested in everything that's there, but I'm interested in how those things look as well. And this is the bill of sale for the purchase of a slave, a estate listing transferring slaves from parent to child, and a reward poster for the capture of the slave. So these are all things that were part of our American daily life. They were documents like the documents that we are involved with today over our titles for our property or deeds for a car or anything of that nature that we think of as property. These official documents were documents that were used to deal with property in the context of human beings. And so they were remarkable items for me. And as I just read from Jackson Lears, they seem to be concentrating a set of ideas and notions and emotions and experience and perception into one place. I was also, though, fascinated by ordinary material. This is a receipt that was in the possession of Zora Neale Hurston. This is a hand-drawn map of her hometown. It's in a collection at Rollins College. Another vernacular item. These are sort of day-to-day items, but yet they have remarkable connections to special aspects of African-American history. A newspaper from Omaha, Nebraska. All of these items, a program for a performance, a graduation pamphlet from Meharry University, Meharry Medical School. All of these items are things that are also, and so one of the things that will come at the end is the difference between items that had to do with restrictions in Black life and items that are created by African Americans. So they are both part of the African American experience, but they are, uniquely apart from one another. Books were fascinating to me. The Clarkson Abolition of the Slave Trade, 1808, and that was actually a photograph that I made while working on the Seven Steps project, and so that's another way in which I just moved something from one category to another, because I just wanted all these books to be together, because it seemed to me that over and over books became not just important, they're important for everyone, but they were especially important for people like Frederick Douglass. This is the first book Frederick Douglass purchased after becoming free from slavery. I want to, Dean Honecker mentioned the Manifest book, and I had the great pleasure of working with an African-American scholar at Berkeley by the name of Lee Rayford, and on that book project, and she wrote a wonderful essay as an introduction to the photographs. And I thought I would just, read a small portion of it. History and memory perform an intricate dance. At times they support one another, buttressing the other's claims, collectively enriching our understanding of the past. At other times, they stand at odds, destabilizing, even undermining the other's claims to authority and authenticity. For African Americans, this dance is especially acute. Memory, as I have written elsewhere, has been a fundamentally central and salient part of Black life, history, and culture. For African Americans in particular, who have traditionally been denied access to formal historical institutions, memory has been more than a mere repository of experience. Rather, Black memory has challenged the official stories and given voice to historic silences. And this is another component of what I've been working on that has become particularly thoughtful to me and particularly important to me in terms of what these objects represent, is that they represent what you see, but they also represent what's not seen, what's not shown. And that also is folded into the way I photograph. So as you noticed along the way, the photographs aren't particularly constructed to give you a lot of information about the object, simply to acknowledge the presence of the object in the archive and in the collection. I have my colleague and friend Tom Papadimitriou to thank for giving me the idea when this show opened at the State Museum in Trenton, that these photographs were like a reliquary. So I appreciate that idea. That's an important notion. Rather, Black memory, it has attempted to suture continuity in the face of rupture and fragmentation. It has proffered futurity woven out of the inevitable terror of the past. As a living entity, memory has proven critical to the identity formation and self-creation, to identity creation and self-formation. In historian W. Fitzhugh Brundage's keen words, the rituals of Black memory represent a form of cultural resistance. And it comes to that idea again that was expressed by adult books in terms of what black teachers were doing in black schools. And even more, black memory implies a certain act of redemption. Memory as a black historical practice, we might say, serves to embody history, to give it breadth, movement, and living context. So I was fascinated. I always have a lot of conversations about my photographs of hair. That's a lot of Frederick Douglass's hair. Actually, most of the hair, not all of it, most of the hair is connected to the Douglass family. His wife, his children, other people. But there are a couple of other hairs that are not connected directly to the Douglass family. But I just became fascinated with the whole way in which hair became a way of holding on to a piece of the body long after a person had left you. And it might just be left your presence, like, oh, I came to visit you. Travel, it's the 19th century, the early, it's hard to get from one place to another. Let me leave you with something as you go away. We might not see each other ever again, and especially, if you're multiple states away. Fixing a shadow, in fact, the title sort of stole part of this. It's a fragment of a wonderful title for an exhibition called The Art of Fixing a Shadow that was done at the National Gallery of Art for the anniversary of the 150th anniversary of the invention of photography. And so the exhibition is about the history of photography, but fixing a shadow for me is just such a poignant notion, and I'm continuing in this vein of memento mori from the idea that hair is this piece of the body that's been left behind, and that the photograph is a piece of the spirit that's been left behind. And I am fascinated as I go to different archives and different collections with the types of photographs that I find and that I encounter, what's left in the image, what the image refers to. And I often photograph these images in a way that almost further obscures the actual content in a sense. I love this graduation ring. It's like the tiniest little thing. These are actually pictures of negatives because, again, the negative itself seems almost more haunted, more spiritual in the sense of that's the original object in a sense. The print is a kind of trace from the negative. It's a trace that takes place by the action of light. But the object that the photographer made was the negative. And that's the object that really traced the real world. So the real world came through the camera and landed on a piece of film. And so that becomes the fixing of the shadow in a sense. And all of those photographs become content for me to think about as a photographer. The oppression of things is now the final piece of this. And we're in the home stretch yet. The oppression of things is a range of pictures, some of them very recent, in which I've really separated out an idea that I started to talk about earlier, which is the way in which there are many objects out there that I think of, and many of us think of as connected to the history of African Americans, black history in America, but the objects themselves are not created by, or in a sense for, African Americans. They are predominantly created for the consumption by white America or as opposition to the presence of blacks in the American landscape. And so these are also very much part of the collection, and I think they're very much part of the narrative, because for black Americans, these objects have power in the way that other objects have a kind of positive power. These objects have what we might think of as a negative power. So this is a slave collar in the Alexandra Library. It's amazing what you can find in libraries. So yay, librarians. At the Alexandra Library at Rutgers University. This is a woman's KKK hood in a collection that has asked to remain anonymous so far, but it's a Southern New Jersey collection. And of course, the contemporary conversation about the battle flag of Virginia. I've said this many times before, that little Black Sambo book was made available to me graciously by Paul Schaap, and I could also do a whole project on sort of the history and the evolution of little Black Sambo books. So I just want to conclude with some thoughts. I recently, as another sort of generous aspect of the interconnectedness that we have as faculty and scholars and friends at this university, and often, others, but I'm particularly fond about it here. A few years ago, Professor Kate Ogden came to me and said, "Oh, we're having a conference here at the college for the Vernacular Architecture Forum." And she said, would you be interested in participating in a panel that they're trying to put together, and you would talk about some of your landscape photographs? And I said, sure. I sort of said, well, who's on the panel? And she said, well, Paul Schaap will be on the panel. I said, okay, I'll do it. But no, Kate was, really identifying that I had a particular interest in how the landscape unfolded in a social and political way, and that was something that was of interest to everyone in that particular conference, and it was a conference I had not attended ever before. And what's also generous about it is that as a result of that, the editors of their scholarly journal came to me later and said, well, you gave this talk, would you like to flesh that out a little bit more into an essay? And so, not thinking, I said yes, I do that all the time. But I eventually struggled through it with a tremendous amount of help from them, and they were willing to make a kind of an accommodation for me, which was because often these kinds of things have illustrations, but not really portfolios of work. So they allowed me to sort of adjust the length of the essay so that I could have room in the journal for pages of just images with the photographs on them in a sort of portfolio format. Having done all of that, I thought this paragraph or so sums up a kind of conclusion. The emphasis of that essay was on schools for the colored and how it grew out of the small town of Black Lives. So this sort of winds its way back, but it also connects all of these projects together. It has to be acknowledged that institutional segregation in the United States has its origins in the previous institution of slavery. Shaping opinions around the use of public and private space has been and continues to be the battleground on which we grapple with questions of citizenship in the fully realized form and belonging in American culture. The recent killing of Trayvon Martin, Stanford, Florida, 2012, revealed, regardless of the legal outcome, that the precipitating event was a perception that Martin seemed out of place in that particular landscape, a gated community with a predefined image of who belongs at that particular moment. The perceptions of who belongs, where, and when are part of deeply rooted traditions in our culture. American values shift over time and continue to be the basis for various expressions of discrimination and segregation based on ethnicity, gender, sexual preference, and class. In North from Slavery, Leon, here I'm referring back again, but Leon Litwack places the segregation of schoolhouses in a context with a broader set of racial anxieties. The possibility that Negro children would be mixed with white children in the same classroom aroused even greater fears and prejudices than those which consign the Negro to an inferior place in the church, the theater, and the railroad car. These conditions of separation extended to other public spaces, such as hotels, restaurants, hospitals, to name a few. Before the Civil War, white abolitionists sought to create a society of racial equality, and they certainly played a key role in bringing slavery to an end. However, not all members of the anti-slavery movements endorsed immediate racial equality. When Albion Tourget expressed his disillusionment at the failure of his country to fulfill the promise of racial equality, it was clear to everyone, including Tourget, that the early ideals of the radical abolitionists and the promise of Reconstruction had faded long ago. In July 1913, just 8 years after Tourget's death, the United States remembered the semi-centennial of the Civil War with the largest and most costly celebration in the nation's history. The event, which excluded African American veterans, gathered every white veteran, Union and Confederate, throughout the United States in Gettysburg, Pennsylvania, at government expense. So they had to pay to get there, they didn't have to be all expense paid trip. The architectural remains of the colored schools are not simply ghostly apparitions of our segregated past. They are the unresolved ideologies, neither living or dead, which still haunt the American landscape. The establishment of separate schools was based on the belief that black children, like all black citizens, were inferior and therefore should not share an equal use of public spaces as fully enfranchised members of the society. There is no doubt that the United States has progressed towards racial equality and social justice since the period of time when it was illegal to educate a slave. Even during the Jim Crow era, many African Americans transformed segregated schools into institutions of excellence and community pride. Uneven academic progress, the school-to-prison pipeline, and community demographics, segregated schools from segregated residential patterns, are persistent indications that progress has not adequately mitigated racism, social injustice, and inequity. And I just have time to read one more thing. So that was the way I had at that moment, just, I guess, a little over a year ago now, when I was sort of concluding that essay, tried to pull together some of these ideas for those projects that span the idea of small towns, black lives, and schools for the colored. And so, hopefully, all of that comes together in a way that explains, maybe, I don't know if explains is a good word, explains my impetus, my motivation, my reason for wanting to express ideas through photographic images, through photographic representation. I'm going to return finally, and then it's like, I'm getting a little warm. Is it just me? No? Take it off? Then I won't look so good. There's a great documentary about the cheer squad called the Kilgore College Rangerettes, and one of their mottos is "Beauty knows no pain." Finally, from Jackson Lear, once again from Jackson Lear, you can tell some of the things that he's written about have been really resonant for me. In another book, though, called Rebirth of the Nation, The Making of Modern America, 1877 to 1920, Lear writes, "To be sure, the consciousness of racial difference had existed for centuries, at least since the earliest European encounters with dark-skinned inhabitants of the New World. But there was something profoundly different about the racism of the late 19th century. It was more self-conscious, more systematic, more determined to assert scientific legitimacy. The whole concept of race, never more than the flimsiest of cultural constructions, acquired unprecedented biological authority during the decades between Reconstruction and World War I. But to focus on physical being alone was not enough. Biology was not, after all, an entirely reassuring basis for identity. Indeed, in its reductionist formulations, it threatened to turn human beings into twitching autonoma. Mere physicality evoked the specter of Darwinian nature, the reduction of human beings to animals involved in an amoral struggle for existence. With apes for ancestors and Hottentots for cousins, white men needed more precise definitions of what it meant to be human and what it meant to be civilized. Racial categories embodied a widespread taxonomic impulse to impose an apparently rational grid on the archaic varieties of nature. In a land where self-making was supposedly a way of life, personal identity became tethered increasingly to origins. For many citizens of the Republic during the decades following the Civil War, being an American increasingly came to mean being a Caucasian. Over time, racial categories reveal a complex blend of fluidity and rigidity. Eventually, even the most despised European immigrant groups, and we know that for a long time, various groups, Jews, Irish, Italians, were not really part of the group that was thought to be white, would find ways to become American by claiming common membership in the Caucasian race, implying, in fact, that whatever else they were not yellow, brown, or black. Thank you. That's very generous. And I'm just reminded, we're not going to have a question and answer here, but if you want to, I will try to answer questions during the wine and cheese reception afterwards, right outside around the corner. Thanks again.
All right, so it's been a lecture by Dr. Wendell White, one of my former professors here at Stockton University. I hope you guys have enjoyed it. I want to thank you for checking in. This is Derek Kason, also known as Uncle Despicable. And we'll come back with something else a little later. Thanks. Bye.